What's the single worst decision that's ever been made in the course of human history? The Xhosa people listening to their prophet, a teenage girl, who told them to kill all of their cattle and that the spirits would provide for them. 75% of their population starved to death. They blamed the few who didn't kill their cattle for the spirits not providing for them. Wow! I looked this up expecting it to be a one-time event in a small region or village. It took place over 4 years*. They killed 400,000 cows, and 40,000 starved to death. Flushed. Mao Zedong ordered Chinese peasants to kill sparrows because he believed they ate crop, thus hurting grain production of China. Without sparrows, nothing kept the smaller bugs and insects in check, and they ate all the crops. Famine ensued. There was another famine, maybe the same, caused by encouraging farmers to build their own iron foundries to promote steel production and thence industrialization. Farmers complied, cutting down trees everywhere to feed the furnaces and neglecting to grow enough food. The environmental devastation wrought led to widespread famine where millions died. And to top it off, the steel produced was of such low quality as to be useless. I think it was 1958. Heard about it on Economics Explained YouTube channel. In the 13th century, the head of the Khwarizm Empire learned from an envoy that a peaceful trade delegation from a neighboring empire had been killed and robbed by a local governor. The envoy asked that justice be done. The leader of Khwarizm decided that this foreign ambassador didn't need to be listened to, and so killed him and sent his head in a basket back to the leader of the neighboring empire. That leader was Genghis Khan. Because of that decision to breach this most basic of diplomatic protocols, the Khan turned his attention away from China and cast his eyes westward. His armies, and hell, followed. Without this one decision, it is arguable that the Mongols never move west and the modern world as we know it is unrecognizable. TLDR** version of what happened next. The Khwarezmian Empire, at the time the greatest power in the Muslim world, is conquered in only 2 years. The Khwarezm dynasty is completely wiped out. The last member kept fleeing the Mongols for 11 years, fighting the Mongols and the Seljuks of Rum, and was eventually killed by some highwaymen. Merv, at the time probably the largest city in the world, was completely slaughtered. Genghis Khan ordered his soldiers to kill every single person in the city, and the amount of dead was somewhere between 700,000 and 1.3 million, depending on source. Total of 10–15 million Khwarezmians dead. Some sources claim that Genghis had a river diverted through the birthplace of the Khwarezm Shah, erasing it from the map. The decision to use leaded gasoline. Thomas Midgley Jr. Not only was he the main man responsible for adding lead to gas, he also developed CFCS, aka Freon, which gases destroyed a good part of the ozone layer. So, I'm thinking this guy's parents should have just decided to skip sex that night. The universe being created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad decision. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place. And some said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should ever have left the oceans. Leaving that cave all those years ago. That was a nice place, been downhill ever since. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place. And some said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should ever have left the oceans. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Haven't seen it. So here goes. The sugar industry convincing American that the real dietary villain was fat, not sugar. And the British. It does my nut in that it's so hard to find yogurt that isn't fat-free. Invading Russia in the winter, or expecting the invasion to be over by winter. Hitler and Napoleon both invaded in June. The problem was expecting it to be over. ExxonMobil deciding to completely ignore their internally conducted research in the 1970s that near perfectly predicted the climate crisis. Because money. Edit. I should update, clarify because it's not entirely correct that they did nothing. They took this information and funded massive anti-scientific disinformation campaigns to misdirect the global public on climate change. Thank you to the users who pointed out this missing detail. This one particularly pisses me off because even from a selfish standpoint, this was dumb. I mean, fair play, keep it on the DL for a bit, but only so you can become the provider of carbon-free energy. Like, why would NTU spend 5 years secretly developing wind, solar, hydro and nuclear programs, then drop your climate news and lobby the government to put every other oil giant out of business unless they buy your stuff? IDK seems like a no-brainer to me. Infinite scroll. I remember when DeviantArt introduced that many years ago. They didn't have a button to start it, so the infinite scrolling started automatically. The problem is that they had put a lot of links, buttons at the bottom asterisk of the page, and not moved them away when they added the infinite scroll. Including the button to report issues like that, and some other buttons which were good for normal use. Took over a month to fix it by adding a Show More button to start the infinite scrolling. Always wondered if that was because no one could report the problem to them. To start a land war in Asia. But only slightly less well known is this. Never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. Not buying a painting from Hitler has to be up there. I forgot his name and most of the story, but the guy who threw the doctor who suggested washing their hands before surgery in a psych ward loudly crying probably set back the medical world a couple decades. Ignaz Semmelweis. A lot of women and newborns died due to them not washing their hands. He proved by washing his hands brought death rates drastically down, but they thought he was mad. Dr. Mike has a video explaining it. Can't decide between two. If Tsar Nicholas had sided with the peasants of the Duma instead of the nobles, there may not have been a Russian Revolution and therefore no Stalin and possibly no Cold War. If the German Reichstag decided to reject Hitler because they wouldn't be able to keep him under control, there wouldn't have been WW2. I've read a lot about Tsar Nicholas, and it's crazy to think about how his failures as a leader led to the Russian Revolution and everything that came of that. I read his father died earlier than anticipated, and so when Nicholas was thrust into power he wasn't ready for it, and you got to wonder how all those major world events would have played out with a stronger and more liked, by the Russian people, leader. Mrs. Hitler giving Mr. Hitler the thumbs up in August, 1888. Not pursuing any criminal charges against the perpetrators of the 2008 banking crisis. Not only did they get away with it, they even gave themselves bonuses after it happened. Meanwhile, the effects of the crisis have shaped the political landscape of the last 15 years, Brexit, Trump, etc., etc. I have absolutely no doubt that they will continue to fuck us again with complete impunity. One of the reasons the middle class is suffering is that trillions in taxpayer money was used to pay bets from bankers' bad gambling and fraud. Should the banks have been propped up? Probably. But they should have been put in receivership, the entire C-suite and board fired, and all discretionary pay for these asshats clawed back. Then chop the big banks up and sell them off. Iceland got this right. Mao's Great Leap Forward, and it's not even close. It was a completely self-inflicted, man-made disaster that resulted in the Great Chinese Famine and about 45 million deaths of his own people. The Great Leap Forward was an ambitious plan for economic development, urbanization, and industrialization in China during the late 1950s into the 60s. The plan, however, ended up being a disaster. During the Great Leap Forward, as many as 45 million people died from diseases and famine resulting from Mao Zedong's failed attempt to convert small family farms to urbanized communes while simultaneously urging them into industrial production and away from agriculture. The Four Pests campaign at the start of the Great Leap Forward is arguably the funniest and most tragic environmental disaster ever. It's dark comedy at its best, worst. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/4_pests_campaign. Killing Harambe. People like to say we split timelines when that fucking gorilla died, but this world has been a dumpster fire since long before that. It's just been smoldering, but it's coming lit again. The war on drugs has probably destroyed more lives than is even conceivable. It's international and potentially more costly than the world wars. We'd like to congratulate drugs for winning the war on drugs. Biggest waste of all time. Still continues to this day. You cannot affect change by focusing on just supply and doing nothing to curb demand. Criminalizing addiction has done so much irreparable harm. Salem witch trials or belief of witchcraft in the first place. Teenage girls drowned or burned to death over complete ignorance. Storytime. So when plague or sickness used to break out, everyone seemed to be getting sick or dying except young women. What happened was that disease was being spread by infected rats. Most young women stayed home to clean the house, and a lot of them had cats as pets that would kill these rats and in so protect these women from being infected. That's why, to this day, being a witch is always accompanied by a woman with a broom and a cat. That other day when I went sock shoe. The invention and proliferation of leaded petrol by petrol conglomerates in the early 1900s. Some estimates say it's killed over 100 million people directly or indirectly, and some estimates are far higher. Raised crime worldwide for 50 years, lowered IQs worldwide, and poisoned the entire planet. Half the US population is said to still have too high lead levels in their body today, and it still kills 1 to 5.5 million people a year, or up to 10% of all deaths globally can be traced to lead. Fucking crazy when I learned about it. Slavery *, every time it's happened. And the fact that it's still happening traumatizes and sets back generations of people and the potential impact they could have had on the world. Allowing lobbyists from property developers, pharmaceutical companies, legal arms dealers and a raft of other unethical companies influence government and individual politicians with money. The scramble for Africa and allowing King Leopold II to gain the Congo. The decision by Stalin to install Trofim Lysenko as a leading agricultural scientist in the Soviet Union. His theories about farming ruined Soviet production for decades, while they assured leadership that production was so high they needed to increase the government's share in order to ensure there wasn't spoilage. His techniques were also taken and used by the early CCCP, leading to yet more famine and devastation. Overall, Lysenko and his theories could be held responsible for north of 50 million deaths by starvation. I can't name a bigger murderer, as far as I know. Hey, look at this extremely tiny thing we realized exists. Let's split it up.